from WBNE.
Howdy, yokes. Before we get started today, I want to let you know that this episode of Bacon and Eggs is brought to you by our patrons. If you love this show and want to hear more of it and want us to be able to continue to create it, the best way to support us is by going to patreon.com/baconandeggs and checking out all the really fun reward tiers we have over there. One of my favorite reward tiers is the $10 tier, which not only gets you unedited episodes of the show so you can hear all the silly moments that go into making it, but they also come out typically like 2 days earlier, but sometimes weeks in advance, which just gives you more content faster, and they're longer. So, I mean, it's like a win-win all around. You also get access to our Discord server, which is just the most amazing community of the nicest people in the world, and like we just love to see you there. So, if you love this show and you want to support us, maybe check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/baconandeggs and sign up for that $10 tier. It's $10 a month, which is like 2 cups of coffee. Like, I believe in you, and it really makes a huge difference in our lives. Howdy, yokes, and welcome back to Bacon and Eggs. I'm Tyler Carlin.
And I'm Ethan Chill.
And today we're going on tour.
Or maybe we're just moving back to France.
So learn sign language.
And question what it all means.
Because today we're bringing you
Sound of Metal.
Not only are we talking about Sound of Metal, but we are joined by a guest this week who has probably the most impressive resume of anybody we've ever had on this show. It's not just the blue check on Twitter. There's so much more than that. Our guest today was just named a 30 under 30 by Forbes, like Forbes 30 under 30 in entertainment, as well as she is on the board for Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation. I am so honored and so excited to welcome Keely Catwells to the show. Keely, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, we're so excited. Did I like intro you well? Was that accurate?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I mean, I don't have the blue check on Twitter. I'm not that up there yet.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Plenty of people have that blue check that don't deserve it. Let's just point that out.
John's got that blue check, and he hasn't done anything in like 10 years. So
also, you said that Keely had the most impressive resume. I would be remiss in saying that your wife was on here one time, Tyler, and you're normally the one that mentions that. So,
well, my wife was on here, and her extremely impressive resume is married to me.
Keely, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this wonderful, Oscar-contending, beautiful movie that we watched.
At least I think you think it's beautiful. I really don't know. But let me real quick run down some stats. Sound of Metal was directed by Darius Marder. It came out on November 20th, 2020, which is about 144 days ago. 144 is 12 squared, so it's a great number. We don't know the budget for this film, but it didn't make hardly anything. It only made $102,000 because there was a pandemic last year. The industry is down. It got a 97% critic rating and a 90% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an 82 on Metacritic. Keely, what do you think in a blurb of Sound of Metal?
So I think I've got conflicting views, and also I just want to state that I'm a part of the disability community, not necessarily the deaf community, and the two are separate, although they do come together. And I only know disability through my perspective and my lived experience, and not through anyone else's. But something that I found really interesting in this film, and a subject that I think is so important for all creators to talk about and touch on, is what do you do when a character in a film becomes disabled or becomes deaf halfway through a project? Do you hire someone who's non-disabled to play that role? Do you hire someone disabled to play that role? And what happens? How do you make that work? And that's what this film really got me thinking about, and having these conversations with the disability community and the film community, and seeing what we can sort out and how we can come up with that.
Wonderful.
What do you think of Riz Ahmed's casting, or is that going to be like a bigger topic we'll get to in just a bit?
Definitely a bigger topic. Yeah.
Ethan, what about you? A blurb, your thoughts on Sound of Metal?
From the perspective of a movie lover and a musician, this movie is like really tough to watch, just because like I know people this has happened to, not to the extent that it's happened to the character in this movie, but like that people that have severely, even at young ages, damaged their hearing through the playing of absurdly loud music. And it's just like, I really, for the first time in my life, I think was put in the perspective to some extent of what it would be like to lose that from my life, and like the what he goes through after doing that, after losing his ability to sort of play the way he used to, and having to sort of find a new everything almost. It was heartbreaking to watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it as a movie. I know that it is obviously flawed in certain ways, and it'll never check all the boxes and hit all the notes, but I thoroughly enjoyed it as a movie.
So my perspective there, I really enjoyed it as well. I felt like I've watched a few of the Oscar noms this year, not all of them. I typically end up more on the movie side of things than the film side of things, and I think this categorizes itself more as like a, capital F film. But I really did enjoy it. I don't know all the behind the scenes stuff. I would love to obviously learn more about the casting and the approach that should be taken in these situations. But the final product, to somebody who doesn't know what I should know, was a really enjoyable film. I don't know that it's my top contender for Best Picture, but I can very easily see somebody saying this was, or even somebody saying that this is their favorite film of all time. Because I do think the final product, after the paint has dried, it is a fantastic story and is a really wonderful film.
I think also from like taking the good stuff away from the movie is that from a disabled and perspective, it shows that a film about the disabled community, or the deaf community in this case, can be successful. And we want to hear these stories. We want to see what it looks like. We want to see the stories that we really haven't seen before and haven't touched on before. And I think that was great. And I'm just so happy that story, not necessarily the casting, but the story has made it all the way to the Oscars.
Sure. Yeah. And not only the story, just the story as a work of fiction, right? Like it's a complete, as far as I know, a complete work of fiction about, this is a space where you get a lot of biopics, a lot of true stories being told in the movies, and not a lot of these fabricated tales the way you would tell another story, right? It's always sort of been a separate and kind of other thing. And I think this movie goes a long way toward reducing that gap, that otherness, in that, like, this is just a movie, a new screenplay, just like a lot of other movies. And there's there isn't a difference because there isn't a difference, right? There doesn't need to be a difference. I don't know if that made any sense. That was a lot better in the noggin than on the paper.
Well, out of 100, where do we land on this film? Keely, I'll start with you. It is a lot here.
I've got so many conflicting thoughts and views and opinions. I'm going to go out of 100. I will go 20.
20.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Okay.
This is a whole different conversation now. Everything has changed.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to reserve my score then. I'm going to save mine to the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, let's get into that then. Like, where does this fall short to start with? Let's go ahead and dive on that football.
For me, authentic casting is everything. For me, you can't have a movie anymore and not have authentic casting. You can't. The excuse of we need a name to fill a role that's meant for someone with a disability or who's deaf doesn't fit anymore. Have the name in the secondary role. The truth sells. The truth wins. Diversity is selling. And how can we have disabled people who are as big as George Clooney and Nicole Kidman if we don't start to cast them? So I really think companies have to take that opportunity of diversity with integrity. And if they're going to tell disabled stories, they have to include disabled people, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. So for me, it's really about the authenticity, and that's where it falls short for me.
I hear that.
Yeah,
I feel
absolutely.
That. So you own, and you were the CEO of C Talent, correct?
Yes, correct.
you had an actor, and forgive me if I'm wrong, you had an actor in Baby Driver.
Yes.
How does that representation and experience compare here? Because it was a deaf character in Baby Driver, correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So CJ Jones, who is in Baby Driver, he is a phenomenal actor. And he tells this really cool story of when he auditioned for the role. And I mean, his perspective on auditioning for roles that do specify that they need a disability or do not specify is really interesting. And the stereotypes that he has often faced, and the myths and the biases of people, and the way that he communicates, it's really fascinating to see that. But the role that he played was great because it didn't necessarily focus on him being deaf. It was this really awesome character who just happened to be deaf and was the father of this guy. And I mean, I loved it. I think his role was fantastic. And we've heard talks of Baby Driver too. So we're very excited to see where that can go and how that role could develop.
Oh my God. I have no idea how they would continue that story, but I would love a Baby Driver too.
I mean, he eventually ostensibly gets out of jail, right?
Right.
Like,
that's I guess
the whole thing is, but unless you follow the line of thinking that he died at the end.
But even returning to Baby Driver, is there an issue with representation with Ansel Elgort playing this character who has hearing issues, and at the end of the film does become deaf?
Yeah, that is a.
And I mean, Ansel Elgort has all sorts of problems. We don't stand, right? But
yeah, that's sort of a different bird of a different feather there.
Yeah, it's such a. I mean, the conversation again, and once again, like not being from the deaf community, but my perspective as a disability advocate and someone within the disability community who's really fighting for authentic representation and more inclusion of this incredible disabled talent pool that just hasn't been tapped into for so long. You know, I would want to see authentic representation throughout. And if that means they have to change the casting, then, I mean, I don't know how they would specifically do that, but I think authenticity and inclusion and being truthful to authentically portraying disability does go above those kind of technical aspects, and that has to be prioritized in moving forward.
So I've got a few points to pivot on that, and I'm just going to keep asking you what I think may be hard questions. If you're like, Tyler, tell a joke, just tell me, and I will. In the notes you sent to me prior to this recording, you did note that Riz Ahmed, despite being a hearing actor and not being deaf, did spend 2 hours a day every day for 8 months learning sign language. How does that compare to, now tying it back to Baby Driver and a character in that, like Jamie Foxx and Ray wearing the contacts the whole time and treating himself like acting as a blind character?
I mean, it really doesn't compare to lived experience. Again,
of course,
you can train for 5 years and trying to figure out what it's like to live in a different body and from a different perspective and a different lived experience, but nothing compares to the real thing. And you don't know about those societal barriers that you face unless you've lived it. And, you know, I don't feel like we should or could, and we can't keep continuing to award actors for playing disabled. There's a term called cripping up, and that is what cripping up is.
That sounds really rude.
It's you win an award for basically disability is a lived experience. It's not a technical skill that one can learn. And if we continue to award actors for learning how to play disabled and winning actors for that, we will have a societal problem for a very, very long time.
So picking up on that, it sounds like you don't want Riz Ahmed to get any sort of awards for this role.
Right. You're right. No, I don't.
But it is like a paint-dried finished product. Where do you stand on Sound of Metal and Best Picture?
Again, it's so difficult because I like to see a story about disability or deaf culture in this case. that has done so well. So we can use that in the future as an example to say, hey, look how well this film did. And it happens to have, it does have, members of the deaf community in the film, maybe not in the lead role, but within the film. And the story is about deaf culture and, well, it's not about deaf culture, but it's within the deaf community. And look how well it did. It won an Oscar. So don't be afraid to tell those stories. Don't be afraid to include people with disability. And hey, let's take it one step further and have authentic representation in the casting. So in terms of Best Picture, if it did win, I would not be wholeheartedly disappointed. But I've just still got these conflicting thoughts of, yay, I like that there's a film about the disabled community.
Right.
And there's no authentic representation. It's very difficult. It's a difficult conversation to be having, and I'm pleased we're having it because I also love hearing the perspectives of people from the deaf community and the disabled community on this as well, and hearing their views and their thoughts. And, none of us are always going to be in agreement about things. So just continuing to have these conversations with people who are within those different communities and in the film industry is great.
Sure. And that's what we've learned a lot over the past, 5-6 years, especially with every different kind of representation, is that for a lot of people, it starts and stops at seeing themselves in the movies, right? Whether that's people with disabilities or Black people or women or anything. It's like, you can't take those experiences of seeing yourself in the movie away from people, and we shouldn't. And that, those are completely separate conversations. But again, this is one of those situations where casting Riz Ahmed does not really do anything for this movie in terms of like name recognition, or, it's not like he's a thoroughbred Oscar actor, right? Like this is the guy that played the villain in Venom, and that movie sucked.
Hey, he was also the pilot in Rogue One.
Okay, and that movie kind of sucked.
Oh man, I think we're going to revisit Rogue One and love it.
I have no like issue with Riz Ahmed's prior roles or whatever, but like this is not a movie where you could not have cast a deaf or at least hearing impaired person in some way in this role. Like he's just a regular guy, right? Like yes, he can learn it all you want, and it's the same with things like Netflix's Atypical, right? Where we want to bring autism spectrum disorder to the front for a lot of people, and then we cast Kira Gilchrist, who is a neurotypical person, to play this role where it's like he's not somebody, right? It's not star power you're looking for. Like what you're looking for is convenience. And that's the conversation that needs to come up with these studios that are making these things. It's like what you want is somebody who can be outwardly relatable theoretically to the masses to get them interested in that thing. And that's got to stop somewhere. Not to say that if you have if you cast George Clooney in this part instead of Riz Ahmed, then you have a right. But it's like you're not casting George Clooney. Why don't you just go for the right thing, right? Like get somebody that knows, that has lived it, right? Get some, because he can hear at the end of the day. He can hear, right? He can go home and he can hear. And there's nothing you can do to simulate that, right? Like you could put an earplug, sure, but like if he needs to communicate with somebody, he could just pop him out and talk, right? Like that's the problem.
Yeah, I think shows like Atypical and this movie, there is this first step of, but we cast other people in the show with disabilities. And that has been great. I mean, we've had clients on Atypical, and that's been great. But now it's taking it to that next step of hire a lead character who has a disability. And not just in shows that are about disability, in every show, in every movie, just we have to push forward the representation of disability. 1 in 4 people are disabled. People very much underestimate that number. And we're a huge
1 in 4.
1 in 4 people. We're a huge population. And it's not just in front of the camera as well, it's behind the camera. We need people in writers' rooms who happen to be disabled, writing all characters, writing all stories, not just the ones that emulate from their culture, but ones that are encompassing of disability or not, in everything. And I think so many myths and so many stereotypes have been created because, if we look back to Captain Hook and the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Joker, we've consistently been perceived as burdens or villains or, the scary person. And our disability has been used as the weapon or has been used to victimize the character or to create this caricature, which has presented us in a way and has a massive domino effect to how we are in life and how the way people treat us. So I think if we start with film and TV and we integrate disability seamlessly from entry level to the CEO and beyond, to on screen, to behind camera, then slowly things will start to get a lot better. But we have to be respected the same way as everybody else, and we have to have that equal treatment and be seen as as valued and be seen as wealth and why we're needed and why it's so important to have that authentic portrayal. And the talent is there. I think a lot of the times the question is, we really wanted to hire someone, but we couldn't find them. And in my experience, that's a bad excuse because we are everywhere. And in a phrase that one of my clients said to me the other day, and I love this phrase, is close your eyes and point. We are here.
I love that. That's so good. And I don't know if this is a pivot, but I have a few questions, but just to speak on Ethan and I's personal experience, we've been best friends since we were, 12?
Something like that.
11.
Yeah.
We were 11 when we met.
Yeah.
We had very little exposure to, we were in like a gerrymandered school with white, healthy, wealthy kids. Like it was a public school, but like you ended up here for a reason. And the only exposure we had to the deaf community in high school was, honestly, like pulled from this film is the foil to our exposure to the deaf community in high school. Basically, we had a teacher in our music department who had a son who was deaf, and he was so, exactly like Riz Ahmed's character in the film, so gung-ho on my son will have cochlear implants, my son will hear, my son will play trombone, my son, all of this stuff, to the point where when we were in music theory class with this teacher, we watched a documentary about how these deaf communes are like, savage. Like,
it was definitely a different side
negative
of the coin.
Portrayal. And I knew going into that conversation in that class, like it wasn't like I was indoctrinated into this and then felt this way for years and years. I think I could tell then, like, this is a very pointed perspective. But that was like truthfully the only exposure we had to the deaf community. I remember being kind of fascinated by that whole course and being like, I would love to learn sign language, and trying to find books on it and trying to find anything on it. And like the content didn't exist or was not accessible to me. And so this movie was an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And and likewise, I'm someone who's in the disabled community and not the deaf community. Seeing how beautiful that language is portrayed on film. I think a lot of people will see that. It's such a stunning language and there's so much history to it, and the community is so vibrant and incredible and fascinating. And I think people do want to watch that, but authentically.
I think I truly believe sign language should be a language that everybody speaks.
Yeah,
I think like
absolutely.
there's my toddler speaks it. Why don't I? Like she can tell me more. She can tell me all done, but she doesn't speak English. So it's so innate. It's so inherent for us to be expressive with our gestures. I think it should, I should be taught alongside English and alongside whatever other, dominant language of the region you live in. I
agree. I completely agree. And I think, accessibility as well is such an important point. And I just want to be conscious as well that this is a podcast, and hopefully it gets transcribed so the deaf community can have access to it. And I think that's such a big problem that people don't that people forget, and it's just because of a lack of education and exposure to the disabled community, and we need to just be more familiar with asking people what their accommodations are and making that like a regular question.
Well, and transcribing a podcast is not cheap. Like in the past, I'll be candid, we have not transcribed our show. I think we'll make an effort moving forward and definitely do something at least for this episode. But like transcription is not cheap. Like coming from the podcast community, knowing the amount of money that our show generates and knowing the cost of transcribing each week, I mean, it would cost every dollar we make and more because of the amount of minutes and the amount of content that we put out
across our network. And because we're floating a bunch of other shows, not floating, but we are supporting a bunch of other shows that are not as fortunate as we are as well. So that like, and it's definitely something that we, I'm on a Dungeons & Dragons actual play podcast with a member of the disabled community who is constantly pushing for this kind of thing. And it's just, it's becoming more and more a reality, especially because YouTube's caption generator is actually starting to get pretty decent. Turns out it can kind of keep up with us. It can kind of keep up with a lot of people these days, which is a fantastic thing. And just another like free tool from Google to sort of make these things more accessible. But yeah, it's definitely having the audio medium here is definitely a privilege. For sure. I mean, I can't imagine trying to interface with content like that if I was somebody that couldn't do that. And that's, the thing we constantly have to be asking ourselves is like, how are we creating these spaces for people that don't necessarily have how are we making these things easier for people that already have it hard enough, right? That's the constant struggle.
Yeah, it's not even that people have it hard because of their disability, but we live in this social model world where the social model of disability is where, we are disabled by the world around us because of the physical structures that get in our way.
Yeah.
And the medical model as well. And all of these different things which continuously make life more difficult and just creates lots of different ways for the disabled community to continuously be shut out from conversations and opportunities and employment. And I think also, I would like to challenge companies and small businesses who may not think that they do have the means to create accessible content. It's a huge learning curve for sure, and it's challenging. And but if you look at the numbers and the business case of disability and the business case of the deaf community, those are huge numbers and those are huge audiences, and it's a massive untapped market that people are not thinking about and are not tapping into. And that's also something else that we do is work with companies and consult to try and make their content and everything that they do more accessible so they can attract the disability market, which is a massive untapped segment for sure.
I was reading that on your page that you write that the disabled community is a $1 trillion market.
Absolutely. It's massive. We have a huge buying power.
That is so many dollars. Like unfathomable market. Yeah, I mean, so it is, and I appreciate the challenge. It is certainly something for us to be more mindful of moving forward. And it sounds like we may know somebody who can help. Was this just an elaborate sales pitch? That's what I want to know.
Oh my goodness. Well.
I wanted to ask you more about characters in fiction and sort of across the board in disability, because outside of just watching movies and talking about movies, Ethan and I are avid readers. I mean, Ethan has read 68 books this year and I've read 36.
Yeah, I did. I have read 68 books this year.
Yeah, like very avid readers. I mean, I read more books than I watch movies. Truthfully, I was sitting there. I like to display a book on this shelf sort of related to the topic that we're talking about. In this, you don't even need to cast anybody. Of course, we'd love to hear from disabled authors and publishers, but the only book that I could think of that features disabled characters in any way was Hank Green's sequel here, Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. And in that book, he has to invent a disability. So it's not even like he's talking about something established. He like has to create this disability. And it's like really sad that like you don't even need to cast, you don't need to find anybody. You just have to write the character into existence. And I honestly, 38 novels, 38 stories, not a one. And I'm embarrassed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not so much familiar with the book world, but I think it's the same problem over and over again, especially with storytelling. And I think where does it start? I mean, I think it starts with the lack of access to employment of people with disabilities to be able to tell their stories, for sure. And a lack of education and knowledge within organizations about disability and how to include disability. And it's a huge shame because not only are there incredible stories within the disability community, I mean, look at Crip Camp as well, which I'm so excited about. And I really hope it wins the Oscar this year. But also just how can we get people writing these stories to not just write characters specifically with disability in mind, but when they're casting characters just to say, oh, I mean, yeah, they can be disabled and I actually don't need to change anything within the script. I can just imagine that character being disabled and that will add so much to the story naturally because they're just different to who they had in mind. So it's a really interesting topic in the book world, though. I'll have to look more into that.
And I wanted to ask you, because you're talking about just imagining this character being disabled. There are characters in what immediately comes to mind is television. There's a character in Glee and there's a character in Supermarket who are in a wheelchair. As somebody coming up, I thought that was really progressive and really well done, but it wasn't disabled actors. And I don't know. Where do you stand on those characters? I can't remember the name of the character in Glee, but with Garrett in Supermarket.
I'm like, I want to see authentic representation. I want to see characters that are not continuously influencing these negative stereotypes that we have consistently seen over and over again. I think it's lazy storytelling. Honestly, I think, I want to see the disabled love interest. I want to see the disabled lawyer. I want to see the doctor who happens to be disabled, which has actually been done. I think it was either Grey's Anatomy or New Amsterdam. They had a deaf doctor, and it was so awesome to see the disabled person actually being the doctor rather than the patient consistently.
Mm.
There's the whole show about that, the Good Doctor, or whatever it's called.
Yes,
I have no idea if that one passes the test or not, but
right. Again, not authentic casting.
Yeah.
But
that doesn't surprise me at all.
Right.
I don't think I realized how much inauthentic casting there was, because as we've been talking about it, I'm thinking about so many characters who have these minor disabilities, but then I look into it because it'll be a side character or whatever, and it's not authentic casting. And I don't know. I was thinking about, we talked about Rogue One. Donnie Yen in Rogue One plays a blind character who, has these sort of supernatural abilities. Neither of the actors who have portrayed Deadpool are blind. Or not Deadpool, I'm sorry, Daredevil. Hawkeye was a character who is deaf in the comic world that they just completely ignored in the films. I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, consistently seeing, and also just the language being used as well in a lot of these TV and film projects where they're just joking around and there's just this ableist language consistently. And, whether we like it or not, we're always subconsciously, when we're watching media, we're soaking that in and we're taking that in. And it's really important that we have people behind the camera more and more and in the writers' rooms who are disabled as well. Otherwise, we're going to consistently keep hitting those barriers and coming up with those problems. I mean, I started to do kind of a very amateur study over Christmas, I watched a ton of movies and TV shows, and I was trying to find the positive case studies of disability. And I did find a few. I know that Run was on Hulu. Kira Allen, she is incredible. And they did that so well. I loved it. I loved that show on Hulu. I thought it was, film on Hulu. I thought that was amazing. Great representation. Definitely a catalyst to different and new disabled storytelling. She did stunts in the movie. It was a great take. It was just, and she's authentically disabled, really well done. But there are still so many wrong ones out there. And as I said, with the language, I noticed how many times they use like the R word in these movies. And that's very upsetting and very frustrating. So it's not just like the representation of the physical of the person, it's also the language throughout the entire industry.
Well, so on the subject of the movie we came to talk about, where do we land on things like Paul Raci? I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Who plays Joe, the mentor that is a hearing person but grew up with deaf parents. Like, obviously, to some extent, like, I guess a member of the community. Like, his first language before he learned English was American Sign Language. Like, how do we feel about him playing this character? Where does that come down?
I think, so again, as someone from the disabled community, not the deaf community, from my perspective, this kind of goes back to that conversation of, I think he would fit in where you've got that conversation of the character becoming deaf halfway through a show. So
sure,
how do we kind of create a solution which is the right way to do it? And I think that is hiring someone within the community who knows the culture, knows the language, has been brought up around, completely in it and knows everything surrounding the community. So I think if he was playing the character that became deaf halfway through the show, I think that would be better.
Fair.
I was just thinking that as well. I was like, it wouldn't be, the fact that it's a metal band is so, like, it's so not that important to the show. It very easily could have been, a Willie Nelson cover band. And Paul Raci could have stepped into those shoes easily.
Yeah, you can lose your hearing playing any kind of music. That is for sure.
It's loud. It's
yeah.
loud.
And that is a big thing that falls even on my shoulders sometimes, of like being a person in a band that goes on tour and having to make sure that like the kids that we play with in these bars that are sometimes like, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids playing in bands are up there with their amplifiers and their drums. They're not wearing earplugs. And it's like, I gotta take these kids from Oklahoma aside and be like, hey guys, this is, I've done this a couple times. I've been around the block, I guess. Like, this is not something you want to mess around with at all, because like this is in your case, a preventable thing that like, obviously not that losing your hearing is the end of the world by any means, but it's like, it's, he doesn't do what he's supposed to do in this movie. And that's sort of part of the story, is that he lands himself in a situation he doesn't want to be in because he doesn't protect himself. And that's tough. Like, that's very common that this kind of thing happens.
For sure. I think what you said as well is really interesting and such a good thing to touch on too, of like, becoming deaf or becoming disabled is not the end of the world. And it should never be seen as the worst case scenario. I mean, for me personally, growing up, always watching like medical shows and TV, and for my disability always being positioned as the worst case scenario. And that was so upsetting to see. And there's such a different side of disability and the deaf community of like, that celebrate how wonderful the culture is, because it really is a culture. So, I mean, I think that was a great point, something really interesting to touch on.
Like,
well, go ahead, Ethan.
And it's so interesting because it is going deafness especially, and to some extent blindness, are like conditions that can happen to people that didn't grow up that way, like all the time. Like, you know, you look at a light the wrong way for a long time, your vision's gone, right? Like that's it. You know, that doesn't happen with some other kinds of things, especially, you know, things that are passed on hereditarily and things like that, things that people have to grow up with their entire lives. It's like suddenly you're, you know, 30 years old and you now have congratulations, you have a new disability. Here's the rest of your life in front of you, right? And that's what I think this movie does do a good job of portraying, is like the you know, not that it's the end of the world, but that it is a shock, and it can be hard to sort of, because, you know, we the hearing, we the abled suck. Like, we ostracize people like this for no reason, especially deaf people that we can't just talk to, right? Like, that's the whole thing, is that they no longer speak our language, so we want nothing to do with them. And that sucks a lot that we do that.
People definitely forget that anyone can become disabled at any time in their lives. And the majority of us do become disabled if we are lucky enough to live that long. And
yes.
And people sometimes they look at their grandparents and they don't see them as disabled because they're like, oh, it's just a natural thing that happens when you get old, you know. But it's like, no, they're disabled, and it's a great perspective and a great take, you know, of like, this can happen to anyone, any ethnicity, any gender, any society, anyone from any place. You can become disabled at any time. And yeah, this film definitely did kind of show that this could happen to anyone. And yeah, that was really interesting.
I did want to ask, this film does touch a lot on, you know, people can become disabled at any time, and it really dives into those themes, but it also dives into a major deaf community theme of like, we the abled have found what we consider a solution for deafness, that, from what I understand, the deaf community has never been a huge fan of. And I understand you're not speaking from the perspective of the deaf community, but cochlear implants and the returning of hearing. Give me some context and explain some of the controversy around that, because this was something that I was at least somewhat familiar with, but I think some listeners may not be. So I think you could probably explain it better than I could.
Yeah, I think so. From my perspective, if I was watching a movie and all of a sudden my disability was cured, right? I would, and if someone said to me, you know, if you can, everyone's response to this, I think, would be different. There is definitely that. Everyone's very, very different. I've definitely spoken to people who would never not have their disability, and they would never take it back or change what, if they acquired their disability, never change what happened to them. And from my perspective, I would never change what happened to me. But, you know, would I like to have an easier life in this world and it be more accessible? And yes, absolutely. But it's shaped my life in so many wonderful ways, and it's changed the way that I see the world. And I love it. And I love the disabled community. I mean, my best friends are disabled, and I've just found this new world of like vibrant people. And really it's given me this new perspective on being. And I love that. And I think people often don't see disabled people or disability as a culture, or as a community, or as like a place where you can be happy. And again, that's a huge misconception that film and TV have created, that being disabled is terrible and lonely and you're going to be a burden and you're going to have to rely on people forever. And it's not the case. You can have an incredible independent, or even if it's not independent, if you have caregivers, you know, you can still live the most incredible life. But yes, there are societal barriers. So the conversation of like, is it okay to be cured, it's individual. Everyone is different, and that's down to the person, the individual, of if they want to take the opportunity of not having their disability anymore or not. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can answer that so well, and I think I've just jumbled completely, but I think it's just really down to the individual. And me personally, I would never take back my disability.
Really? Okay.
You know, I mean, I grew up, when I was younger, I had two fairly prominent figures in my life that suffered from not the same disability, but sort of the same outcome from their different disabilities. My dad, one of my dad's best friends, was spent his whole life after Vietnam in a wheelchair as paraplegic, and my uncle, my mom's youngest brother, was born with spina bifida and also spent his whole life. He never walked. He spent his whole life in a wheelchair. And, you know, I watched it destroy one of these people, and I watched the other one, you know, become a member of a community and learn to sort of live and love a new life. And, you know, he found happiness, he found marriage, and then, you know, spent several years of his life in a, like, as like a junior monk in a monastery full of wheelchair bound folks. And the other one ended up taking his own life. And so it was like a very shocking thing that happened when I was fairly young, to like watch these two different people, one of whom actively avoided being a part of any kind of community and like saw himself as being better than his disability and let it destroy him. And then the other one thrived until the day he passed away. And that was two different views entirely in my life.
And I am just going to correct you on 3 tiny bits of language that
Okay.
I feel like if I was, as a disability advocate, I feel like it's my my duty to.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
So we don't like to say like suffered from, like if you've got a disability, like we don't suffer from our disability. We have our disability and we don't suffer from it. So we just try to stay away from the language of suffering from, just
Okay.
have a. And then instead of wheelchair bound, uses a wheelchair rather than being bound, because we see, you know, a wheelchair as a mobility device, which is freeing, and you're not bound to it.
Sure.
So not wheelchair bound. And then instead, and this is something I recently learned actually, instead of able-bodied, it's just non-disabled, because it's like saying that you're, you know.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can follow that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And I learned, like, I became disabled when I was 17. I had no idea of anything to do with the disabled community before that, and the language, and, you know, you're not aware of these things until it happens to you or until you're thrown into it. And it's just such an interesting way to view the world. And I feel like I'm in a interesting position, like so many other disabled people who acquire their disability later in life, and also who's been in the entertainment industry for a pretty long time, and seeing that from both perspectives.
Yeah, I will say that the powers that be have never been particularly good in my experience with the language parts of things. I watched both of my parents spent their whole lives working directly with the disabled community, and having to deal with things like HIPAA and Medicaid, and who just decided constantly to change the language, and never in a good way or a way that anybody seemed like they talked to a person who had a disability, and just instead decided to place labels on it. And that was my entire childhood was my dad basically coming home and telling me, like, well, so this is what the government recommends we say now, and none of my students like it. And I'm like, well, then, you know, he's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna call them what they want to be called, right? Like that was simple to him.
That's the big lesson we've learned over the past. I would say that's probably the biggest takeaway from my past 5 years of life is call people what they want to be called.
Yeah. One of the biggest lessons of the 2010s for sure was just ask people and then do it.
Yes, exactly. It's so true because everyone is different. Like the way I want to be identified is so different to someone else who wants to be identified, and everyone's experience and everyone's preference is different. It's so true.
And yeah, there's still so much pushback with the they them pronouns are confusing to me. It's like just it's not though. Like it's not. If you just do it for 5 minutes, it's not hard.
Right. Exactly. Like,
and it makes somebody's day so much better when you just do the thing they ask you to do. Like,
yeah. I mean, being denied your identity because of people's resistance or people's own limiting biases, or is so damaging, and it creates such a horrible positioning within society. So yeah, for sure, it's like just learning. I mean, I think we're all learning, and every time you meet someone new, it's like everyone's different.
So if I may ask, how did you end up doing what you do? Like, because I can sort of guess that you're not American. I might be reaching there. I'm not sure. You never know with people.
Not born American anyway. You may be.
Well, yeah.
So funny. So whenever I speak to my family, I'm British, and whenever I speak to my family, they're always like, "Oh my gosh, you turned American. You sound American." I'm like, "Do I? No, I think I still have my accent."
Not to us.
So funny. Yeah. So
I'm from the South.
Oh God.
From the South. I can't hear the Southern accent.
I mean, I was raised by a news anchor, so I've got like the Midwestern, transatlantic, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, my dad was New York, born and raised. So, and my mom was from Virginia, where I live now. So I've got a little bit of both in there. Where sometimes I'll talk like one of the hill folk, and sometimes I'll take the dog for some water. It just comes out
down to the creek.
I sort of got, after my dad died, his accent like passed into me like a transferal, where sometimes I'll just be like, I'll run a whole sentence off and my girlfriend will just be like, what was that?
Your father truly, like, my family's from New York as well, but your father truly had one of the best accents.
Oh yeah.
Of all humans.
Yeah. It's like you picked him out of Queens for a movie and was like, do this. Just
right.
Would you like to have a role in Goodfellas? Anyway, you are British, and now live, I'm guessing, in California.
Yes, I'm in LA. The sun. I mean, this is like the worst time to be at my desk.
Golden hour.
Directly on my face.
This is the key.
You're as a photographer, you're glowing.
You're glowing.
Love it.
I mean, I saw my dog like pop in the background as well. And his face was like perfectly framed.
Oh yeah.
So funny. Yeah, I'm in LA in California. Yeah, loving it.
How did you go from child in old London town to CEO of a talent agency in Los Angeles?
How long have we got? Well,
that's got half an hour. Yeah.
So the short version, I grew up in Sussex, which is just outside of London, countryside, middle of nowhere, country bumpkin. Grew up riding horses. My parents trained racehorses for a living. So I always thought I was going to be a jockey, until one day my mom said, "Hey, if you're going to be a jockey, you're going to lose your teeth." And I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't want to lose my teeth." So I stopped riding and trying to be a jockey and started dancing. And kind of cut a long story short, got into a very prestigious dance college when I was 16, but fell sick pretty early on in that training and got hospitalized and spent probably about 3 years or so in hospital, in and out of hospital, misdiagnosed, gaslit by the medical system. They told me that I was making it up, that it was all in my head. In their words, that I was crazy. And I spent a very, very long time searching for answers and searching for a diagnosis. And finally, we found a hospital that would listen, doctors that would listen and had the right tests. And basically got told that my insides didn't work correctly. So had an operation which went wrong, multiple operations later, a long time in hospital. I acquired my disability and From that time, I was very, very depressed, didn't know what to do with my life, lost my dream of being a dancer, was never going to go back to dance college, was never going to be a dancer. So I started an interning job at a talent agency, which was literally down the road from the hospital I was at. And it was yo-yoing in and out of hospital and going interning at this agency. And I then got promoted to be the head children's talent agent, started representing around 200 kids and getting them jobs, and still trying to balance health and this new job. And couldn't really do it anymore because of my health. So just started my own talent agency, started representing my friends in dance college, getting them jobs and just kind of learning the ropes. And then when I was finally better and well enough to get out of hospital completely, I decided to take a week and go to LA and travel and get on an airplane for the first time since everything. And that was a huge step for me. And I just loved LA. I just fell in love with the city. Decided that I wanted to move here, got a visa, moved, wanted to try my hand at acting of all things, which I don't do anymore, and lost a job because of my disability. And they said that I would be too unsightly for the screen because of my disability. And that made me see the massive lack of representation within Hollywood and the entertainment industry in general. So converted my talent agency to a management company and started solely representing deaf and disabled artists and athletes. And that is where we are at now.
That is an amazing story.
Thank you.
Yeah, who's going to play you in the movie about you if you don't want to act anymore? It's the real question. That's what I want to know. Holy heck. That also, that you just
so
want to say
incredible.
that didn't take that long.
Yeah, I mean, we're that was 3 minutes. Tops.
Yeah, you did great.
Put it down to a T.
Yeah. I mean, when I hear a story like that and think about the fact that I live 20 miles from the house I grew up in by my own choice, like I want to live here, it's like, man, I could be doing so much.
I felt, I selfishly, I just couldn't stay in the UK anymore. I was so tarnished by what it had done to my mental health and the medical system. Honestly, I was just so sick and tired of it all. As soon as I could leave, I left, and I couldn't wait to get out. And all my family's back home, and my family's the only reason why now I go back. And I still do business in the UK, and it's great for some people, but for me personally, just because of my experiences, and I also got PTSD as well. Just being in LA and California is so much better for me, and I love it. Just built a life here, and it's great. I love the film industry out here as well. I think if you're gonna be in it, for me personally, I was like, I'll just be in it from here. Pre-COVID life,
right?
Yeah.
Well, on the timeline, when did you arrive, like in LA? Unless you don't want to share that, which you obviously don't have to.
Yeah, no, I got here in 2000. Well, my first trip was in 2017, and I kind of went back and forth a lot within that year to get my visa. And getting a visa is just a whole nother kettle of fish. And got my visa in 2018. Yeah, it was hard. Got my visa in 2018. Moved here in early 2018. So been here around 3 years.
I don't know why. I just imagine you'd been here. Like, you don't look like it's possible for you to have been here 20 years. But in my mind, I was like, she's been here for 20 years. She's been changing the industry this whole time.
Oh,
although I don't imagine you're much older than 20. So that's obviously not the case. But
it's been a really interesting journey. And so many people have paved the way. Like, the fight for disability inclusion has been going for a very long time, and especially the one within Hollywood too. There's people out there like Eileen Gruber, for instance, who we actually represent. She's been, flying the flag for a very long time and really paving the way and making it now, our time. And there's so many people like that. So it's been a really interesting time to step into everything.
What's the 5-year, 10-year, 20-year goal? Like how are you going to change the industry? And from where I'm seated in rural Virginia, like, how are you going? I mean, you already are doing an amazing job of this, but how are you going to challenge the mindsets around me, and how are you going to change the hearts of those people that have those stigmas, and what are we going to see in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from you?
I really want to see a world, and this is not just limited to the entertainment industry, but the entertainment industry and beyond. I want to see universal design. I truly believe access is the first step to inclusion. There's the saying that, diversity is a seat at the table, but what if you can't access the door to get to that table, right? So I want to see universal design. I want to see access, education, employment, and action. Right now, we are also in the planning permission process in the UK, ironically. I had to build the world's first fully accessible film studio. And I want that to be a standard for all employers. I want to see universal design throughout every single organization, on every single film set. And it just happened. And that, I think, will be the domino effect to people with disabilities being able to be employed at every level of every organization. And, I want the industry to not just reflect the society that we live in, but to be better and promote a better society that we could live in. But 15% of the population is disabled, and I definitely want to see that reflected within every organization, on screen and behind the screen as well.
Well, and that's the thing is, we not only telling the stories, but also having disabled people telling every story, right? Like that's the thing. It's the same across the board. There's no. You don't have to everybody's experienced life, right? You don't have to, life isn't the property of straight white people. Like we're not the only people that have, stories. We're not the only people that know about love and loss and heartbreak. And that's so often how, these stories get portrayed. Is it's just like, oh, well, if it's a sad movie, it's a bunch of white dudes writing about being sad and stuff, and it'll be portrayed by a bunch of white people. And,
Well, and I mean, just think about it. We just heard Keely's story. It's straight up more interesting than mine.
Right. Yeah.
You've experienced a better crucible, a more interesting crucible. Like, your life is just plain more interesting than mine is as the straight white man in this conversation.
I think every person's story is valid and interesting and relatable. And I want every story to be told. We need when we talk about diversity, I think we have such a limited perspective of what diversity is. There is such a breadth of diversity and intersectionality, and there's just so much that's untold that I want to see, and so many different ways that can be told.
So I want to shift topics here. You had talked, tell me about Netflix's $100 million fund for diverse creatives. I've heard there is mixed feedback. First, what is this? Because my industry loving brain doesn't know anything. Two, is this good or bad? Tell me more.
I saw the initial press release, I think, and they mentioned disability, and they were so surprised of what a lack of disability inclusion was happening. And it's like, we have been trying to get this point across for so many years, way before I was in disabled or even in the industry or even alive. And it's like, they've finally just realized that, oh shit, we need to do something and put money towards inclusion and representation and specifically disability. And I think it's a great thing. And money definitely needs to go to disabled stories and storytellers and inclusion and access and all of these different things. So I'm happy that finally the conversation has shifted from let's just talk about it to let's actually put money behind it. And I'm really hoping that from them doing that and taking that action, that they'll see a massive return, and also there'll be a massive surge of employment of not just people with disabilities, but people of color and of all genders and from every background and intersectionality. So, I mean, I'm pleased it's happening, but it's definitely been a slow process to get even to this point.
Well, and let's make no mistake that in the movie industry, especially $100 million is absolutely nothing.
Right. Right.
Not that it's not great that this is happening, but that like there's still that's like 4 Fox 2K movies total.
That's
Maybe
like half of a Marvel film.
it's like half of a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And I want to see where it's going. I have clients who have incredible works that they've been pitching and trying to get in the door for a very long time. And I want to see where this is going. I want to see where this is being spent. So I can't wait to see what happens to this and how hopefully it can kickstart more incentives and more funds towards.
Sure. Well, and surely these streaming services just absolutely churning and burning through content left and right can only help this, even if just the fact that they're eventually going to run out of really boring white people stories. Hopefully, very shortly.
Well, I mean, like Netflix is putting out, what, 52 original films this year, right?
At least, yeah, something like that.
Do you know, Keely, do you know how many of those have disabled actors portraying accurate characters?
I do not know the specific stats of being like up to date, mainly because also there's a very huge lack of reports surrounding disability. I mean, I think there's only ever been one report done of people with disabilities behind the camera and that being actually kind of, calculated. But I know that, less than 5% of, there is less than 5% portrayal of characters with disabilities. And I think less than 2% of that or less than 1%, let me get my numbers right. Less than 1% of that 5% is authentically portrayed.
Fortunately, less than 2 is also less than 1.
Right. I mean, I may have completely messed up those stats, but that's the one that I remember. And that's relatively recently from the past couple of years. They may well be a more up-to-date one, but that's the one that I know of.
So what can I do? What can I do to help this cause? Is my whole approach like social media activism where I'm sharing posts, stories, or is there like actionable steps that I can take? Again, and also beyond voting with my dollar and paying to see films that are created by and starring well cast and well hired, well employed folks with disabilities.
I would say create accessible content and everything from on social media having image descriptions to.
I noticed you do that.
Right, it's something that gets overlooked all the time, and it's really important that everyone can access it's just equal treatment, and again, like with transcribing or having interpreters, because not everyone from the deaf community reads and writes. They speak in BSL and ASL, so just having accessible content, being as accessible as possible, and I think internet activism is great. I'm a huge fan of like reposting and social media and sharing, but as long as it's accessible. I mean, accessibility is like my main. I'm just such a preacher for accessibility.
And you looked like you were going to say something. That's why I didn't say anything.
Oh my God.
No, sorry. Zoom exploded on me.
Oh,
I've been trying to get it back.
Accessibility being the key for creatives like ourselves, people who are putting content out there. And then for consumers, it's voting with your dollar, right? It's saying, I like this content, I want to see more of it, or I don't like this content, I don't want to see more of it.
Absolutely. And getting in the conversation and educating themselves and yourselves. And I'm still educating myself and learning more and more about other people's perspectives and their lived experiences and the way, and trying to understand the way that they see the world and what barriers they're consistently up against, and just trying to support those voices. And it's so important for sure.
Are you back in?
Yeah, I think so. I'm having internet troubles, which is not ideal, but
You got that gigablast. You got gigasecond.
Don't talk to me about cocks.
They refuse to come to my house to bury my cable. It's very frustrating. Can't mow. There's a cable in my yard.
COVID life technology.
Oh,
So
they could dig a hole.
on the subject of voting with our dollar, like, should we? I guess I should not vote with my dollar to watch The Sound of Metal because I should not support Jeff Bezos, and it's on Amazon Prime. But that's a whole different subject. Should I give this movie my dollar?
Oh man, back to this again. Like my conflicting thoughts of yay for stories surrounding the deaf community and disabled community, but darn for non-authentic representation. I would say choose wisely and advocate for authentic representation and
Fair.
tell your reason why you're giving you $1 or not.
Well, and so flip side of that, I think as somebody who's not a member, I would think lifting this film could maybe be a catalyst down the line. Who knows? I do think voting with your dollar to see this over, let's say, trying to think of a movie. All movies are gone to me. What movies exist?
What kind of movie
like,
you're looking for?
Something like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. There are no disabled characters. There's no disability representation whatsoever. I feel like
there's no anything representation.
Correct. There is a black kid. I feel like putting my dollar towards this is doing more for the disabled community than putting my dollar towards, well, obviously J.K. Rowling is the worst, but you get the idea. And in 2001, when she put that movie out, we didn't know she was the worst. Correct? Like, I mean,
yes.
Does that make sense?
From my personal perspective, not speaking on behalf of the entire deaf and disabled community, just speaking from my perspective, yes, I think you are correct with that.
And these are such interesting conversations because, like, you know, we are not all the same as people. And like the sad truth of it is this movie probably went a long way toward humanizing deaf people to a lot of folks. You know, and that may be less true than some other film. You know, I don't necessarily know that there's a ton of like closed-minded people seeking out this movie, looking to get their minds changed.
$1,000.
But like it's always these conversations of like, yes, they should have been made different, but now that they are made, is there something that they can offer? And I think in the case of this movie, the answer is probably yes, because things like this are going to show people that may not otherwise think so, that there are vibrant and valid stories to be told about people that don't look like them. And that's constantly what we're battling with when Marvel makes movies like Black Panther, make a movie about black people by black people, for black people that upset ignorant white people, and like that's a good thing. That is a good thing.
It's a good movie.
I don't know what point I was trying to make there.
Well, here's my question, Keely. Tell me if this is a bad metaphor. Tell me if I'm missing the point entirely. But like, as we've developed pigments and paints for a long time, we painted with lead-based paint, right? We made beautiful works of art that have lead in them, but they're wonderful, fantastic works of art that provided accessibility for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to put paint on canvas. But now that we know that that's dangerous and harmful, we apply the technology, we apply the research and the hours to how can we make this better and safer? Is this film a painting made of lead-based paint?
I think it's a great metaphor in general about, what has been done wrong in the past and what can we do better in the future, and learning from those mistakes so they don't happen again, and what do we need to put in place so we can do better. But I think we've had enough of those. Like, it's about time that we learn from those mistakes. But I do think with this movie and creating it as like a case study of like, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, this is what was great, and this was what wasn't. And if we made it again, this is what we would do different. And I think that being acknowledged is, a great way forward.
Well, and I mean, it's important to point out, we'll know more after Oscar season, but like Amazon is not stingy with their budgets when it comes to fighting the streaming war. Like this Lord of the Rings show they've got coming out was $1 billion. I'm willing to bet this movie cost more than $102,000 to make.
It's less than $5 million.
Less than $5 million.
Yeah.
My money is on more than 102,000, which is what it made. That's nothing. The Oscar might help it. It may bump it up a few $1 million. But like at this point, you cast Riz Ahmed, it didn't work. You didn't make any money. Nobody saw this. Like the only reason we're talking, I didn't know it existed until it was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, that's true.
And I like know I pay attention. I look at these things. And Amazon Prime Video isn't, I think this is what they want to be, but it's not Netflix. It's not Disney Plus. It's not even Hulu, where people just browse and watch what they think looks good. I think Amazon Prime you go to because you know there's a film that you want to see that's on it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, it's like there needs to be educated perspectives there needs to be everyone in the room who is from a different culture, brings a different perspective. We have to have that diversified, varied, true, and honest representation of every person who obviously and should not have the weight of everyone in their community on their shoulders, because that's not right. But just having that knowledge of those people in the room, I think will create something that sells and will be good to have out there. But yeah, I think you're right. True inclusion sells. Truth wins at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. And that is obviously the goal, is to get the stories about people like this, played by people like this, written and directed by people like this. And, that's just where we got to go. I mean, it's time. It's been time. Sort of across the board. It's been time.
Yeah, and the talent is there. That's such a common question. It's like, we couldn't find the talent. The talent is there. Oftentimes, disabled people take untraditional routes, but it doesn't mean that they're not there. You just have to know where to look.
Well, and now we do.
And especially behind the camera, it's like there's so much value to these different, from the your standard movie going audience. Like there's so much beauty in these stories that it's just a shame they're constantly not being told, because they're different, right? They're different from the Hollywood standard. And I'm very glad there are people like you and your company out there trying to get these things changed, trying to get things made better, and trying to get these stories told. That's incredible to be able to have this conversation and talk about this and learn about this. Like this has been incredible.
Thank you for having me. It's such an interesting subject, and I mean, there's so much depth to it. There's so much beauty in different cultures and learning from different people's perspectives. And I can't wait to keep learning more from the deaf community and their perspectives on this film. But from a disability standpoint, it's been really interesting to see that kind of, and have those conversations about, what does happen when a character becomes disabled halfway through the movie. So yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And now we gotta get people to also write books about this stuff as well, so these stories are told. To just get to put these characters across the board in media, because they're sort of not, and that's garbage. Like, and I know that we have a big problem with stuff like this in America. Like people in America especially don't even read books that were written in other languages and have been translated, right? Like the frame of mind is so narrow sometimes. Like it's crazy that movies like this even get made in the first place.
Definitely in America do not watch movies not spoken in English.
Yeah, that's true. We just
Man.
remake them worse.
Yeah.
Hashtag cancel Train to Busan, please.
Which is my, I just want to come to everyone and say, go watch Parasite again. Because I loved it. It was so good.
Yeah, go watch any movie made by a foreign director in their native style, their native language. It's so fascinating and interesting. God.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And again, like it's just like an ASL, right? ASL is a language of its own. And we should have directors who use ASL and have stories told in ASL. We have foreign movies. We should have stories completely in ASL. I think that would be great.
Right, because you can watch a movie that's subtitled in any language and understand it, even if you don't speak the language. Like that's the thing is ASL is considered by so many people not to be a language in the same way that Spanish is a language, right? Like it's different to them. But if there's any language on earth that's ever been made for the movies, it's sign language. It's any kind of sign language.
I remember, I don't know if it was in college or in high school, but I remember there was a situation where if you took an ASL course, it did not count as a language course, but Latin did. And that felt weird to me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Yeah.
And you had like a language requirement. And that's what I wanted to learn. And instead I was translating. Oh, I don't even remember what I translated. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, nobody made you take Latin.
I know. Why did I do that? You studied Spanish. So Ethan got his degree in Spanish and spoke fluently throughout our entire education. We lived together pretty much throughout all of college. I would say that I was 40% fluent in Spanish, having not taken a Spanish class since I was 14 years old.
Wow.
Like,
Impressive.
and I just refused to in college. Like we had to take up to like a 200 level in college, and I just refused to do Spanish. I was just like, nope, I'm going to learn Latin and Italian.
Let me tell you.
Can't speak either of them.
It's a skill you got to practice daily, though, because it just
do you lose
goes away. I would have an easier time picking it back up than somebody who never has, sure. But like, if you drop me off in the middle of Paraguay right now, I would be in trouble.
Yeah, I am your typical privileged Brit who has not had to speak any other languages. So I would love to be able to learn multiple different languages, but
I know the other day my girlfriend was like, man, I wish I grew up in Europe because like they all know other languages. And I'm like, a lot of them don't. A lot of them don't. Like,
no, definitely not. I mean, I wish I could say that I knew a little bit of French. I mean, I tried to learn a tiny little bit, but no, terrible.
Well, Keely, what are your final thoughts here? What did you want to say to our audience that we have not already said? Because I think we're at a point where like we typically do like a ranking and big board and stuff. I don't think that's super appropriate with the content that we've discussed today. So I just want to like skip that. Because I honestly have no idea, like the 0 out of 100 that we talked about, I have no idea after this conversation where I would put it.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't want to subject myself to that. So are there any final thoughts you want to share with our audience that, my amateur interviewing skills have missed?
Final thoughts. Go and hear the perspectives of people from the deaf community, other people in the disabled community, and see what they have to say, because I'm still getting loads of different comments from everyone, and it's so fascinating to kind of piece those all together and then come up with your own thoughts. So yeah, just go and talk to people within those communities and ask them. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest lesson is authenticity wins. Create access, hire people with disabilities and people of all diverse, from all backgrounds, and in every position of your organization. And that will, at the end of the day, be the best thing for your movie.
Yeah. And if you want to hear more of Keely, if you just search her name on any podcast app, she's appeared on a variety of different shows with hosts who are much more qualified to talk about this.
What?
That I've listened to a few of them, and always a fascinating guest on any podcast. You might find something new that you absolutely love. So I recommend that as well. Ethan, do you have anything to say?
I was just gonna say, do us a favor real quick. Recommend me some movies?
Oh yeah, what does it well?
Okay, Run, definitely on Hulu.
Okay.
Around. Another movie
Or TV shows or anything. They can be people that you've worked with or not. Just what does it well? What got it right?
Okay. Oh man, I get this a lot, and I'm surprised to still have surprisingly not made a list. That is my homework, I think, today. Who did it well?
Look, I have a question.
Yeah.
On one that I don't know if it did it well, and I don't know if you're familiar with the film. Warwick Davis and Willow playing a small character that's like integral to the part of the story. Where does that land?
I haven't seen Willow.
Oh my God, go watch it. You're going to love it. It's so good.
I will. I definitely will. But Warwick Davis, he plays such awesome characters.
Yes.
He has a way of playing characters, and his disability is never, I don't think he's ever played specifically a disabled character, but he is just awesome. He played a character recently, and he was like a hitman or a drug dealer or something.
He does all sorts of silly roles. He's so good.
So good. I loved it. It was so good. Yeah, his films are great.
There are several Peter
on the
Dinklage
top-
movies where he plays hitmen as well,
Yes.
which are fantastic.
Yes. Yeah.
I will say on the topic of Warwick Davis and books, I did read his autobiography this year, which I guess does count.
As a book that has somebody with a disability in it. Yeah, that might.
So if you haven't read that, highly recommend. It came out in like 2010, so it's a little dated on like projects that he's done, but fantastic.
Yeah, I definitely will. I haven't read that one.
And we can recommend Baby Driver. Is that one that we're cool with?
Well,
Same.
sure.
Cool.
But Baby Driver does have like Ansel Elgort and Kevin Spacey in it, though, so it's not without problems for totally other reasons.
Just go watch Jay Jones, our client. He's great.
Right.
You can't, there's only so much you can hold the movie against things that people in the movie did after they were in the movie.
Yeah.
Not to say that you should, go buy 100 copies or mail Kevin Spacey a bunch of money, but like, you'd probably be okay watching the movie. Just remember that like people are complicated and sometimes people do horrible things, and actors are not by any means immune to that or in any way forgiven for those things. I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
I've learned so much.
I have
today.
too. A lot of thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, taking the time to give us the lowdown on some things.
Oh, for sure. Thank you very much for having me. This has been a great conversation, and love your guys' podcast.
Do you listen to our podcast?
I have fun. I have listened to a lot of your podcasts. I think they're great.
No way. Oh, that's so cool. I didn't think you did.
Video can see the face I'm making, but audio cannot.
Truthfully, like we get reached out to, like not often do we talk to somebody whose agent reaches out to us. Mostly because when somebody's agent reaches out to us, I just ignore the email. But yours, I was like, this looks super interesting. But I generally just assume that they go to like the iTunes top charts and they're like movie podcasts and just contact everybody. So the fact that you've heard our voices,
we would like to come talk about this horror short film that we have at this horror festival. And I'm just like, we're not your audience. We're not your audience. Like, I'm very happy for you that you got in the Federico Fellini horror festival, but like, it is not our scene at all.
It's too funny.
Well, Keely, thanks for hanging out with us. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you continue to be able to do the great work that you're doing, and that things get easier to move out of the way. Things that the roadblocks are taken down, dismantled board by board. Thank you so much, you guys. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Ethan, do you want to sing us out?
Yeah, I'll roll us out real quick. This has been another episode of Bacon and Eggs. Our graphics are by Vaishnav Brandon, Graphite WMB on Instagram, and our music is by Andrew Scott Bell. Andrew Scott Bell Music.com. Keely, where can we find you on the internet if we want to learn more about you and the things you're doing and possibly help in some way?
You can definitely find me on Instagram, Keely Catwell is just my name, and then also C Talent, which is the letter C Talent, and then our website is ctalent.org, and then my website is keelycatwells.com. Very simple.
Super simple.
Wonderful. Well, that's all we got to say about that. On behalf of Bacon and Eggs, WB&E, my name is Ethan Etchell. That's Tyler Carlin. That's Keely Catwells. And until next time, arrivederci.
American Sign Language.